Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Take Back My Brain. I am your host, Lori Hammer, and today I have with me Andrea Nicholson, and she is a certified holistic practitioner, and she is going to talk to us today, which I'm super excited about because she used to be a crime scene investigator. And I don't know about any of you out there listening, but how many of you like the crime shows out there? I'm like thinking CSI Miami, all those which we've always watched. And so I'm so curious, how do you go from a crime scene investigator to a certified holistic nutritionist? So, Andrea, thank you for being with us today. And I can't wait to hear your story. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's going to be a lot of fun. This is going to be a fun conversation.
Absolutely. So I do have to ask because CSI Miami was one of my favorite shows. And so is it as glamorous as Callie made it look on CSI Miami?
I think you already know the answer to that question is no.
No.
TV is always more glamorous than reality in every career field.
You just didn't have all those really good looking coworkers and,
Yeah. Yeah, there's that. There's no high heel shoes. There's no
yeah.
fancy cars
Like,
and
how do you go
Hummers.
in high heel shoes and a white suit to a crime scene? And got that.
Yeah,
So,
no, no,
yeah, right.
no. You wear stuff you're going to throw away. You don't
Exactly.
wear anything
Exactly.
nice.
Yeah, that's gross. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me, how did you go from crime scene investigator to, well, why did you become a crime scene investigator? And then how did you get out of it?
Yeah, for all the same reasons people watch the show, I found the science fascinating. I love puzzles and investigations and just figuring things out based on, following the trail of evidence and being able to identify those things. And so
Mhm.
the career field was fascinating and I loved it, but it also comes with its downsides, like a lot of careers do. And it's, 24/7. It's very negative.
Yeah.
You see the worst of society every day. It's high stress, it's long hours, it's
Yeah.
life interrupting, it has a lot of downsides too. And so, as much as I loved it, it ended up not being the thing I stuck with longer than 15 years. I did do it for 15
That's a
years.
long time.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But how it relates to my health journey, while I was working that career, I was on my own health journey. Like we all seem to be at various times in our life. Law enforcement has a very high heart disease rate, high
Right.
heart attack rate, high stress job, all the things.
Mhm.
And that's true not only for the police officers that are literally on the front lines, but also for the support staff that are, dealing with the same long hours and
Yep. Yep.
negative things and all the things. So I was on my own health journey. I personally have really bad heart disease in my family. My
Yeah.
entire lineage, all the way back, all died of heart disease at various levels, heart attacks, bypasses, just all the things. And so that was always in the back of my mind because they all died young. And
Yeah.
that was really just not the future I wanted for myself. But I was adopted, so I didn't really know
All
great
the ins and outs.
detail.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how they lived or what the thing, but I know they were overweight. I know a lot of them smoked and drank and,
Uh-huh.
didn't have the best lifestyles. So presumably that's really what's behind it. But it was still in the back of my mind as well, if all of them died of it,
Right. It's still a
was there
genetic
something?
component. Yeah.
And so because heart disease is a big deal in law enforcement, our sheriff at the time actually brought in this high level cardiac panel to
Yeah.
test everybody so that we could try to get ahead of things before people, died of
Yeah.
heart attacks. And so they did the carotid scans and EKGs and
Wow.
the particle
Amazing.
testing and
Yeah.
just, all the things, stress, hypertension tests, and just all the things. And I was in my mid 20s at the time. And I was like, I wasn't overweight. I was living a reasonably healthy life. I thought I was doing really well.
Yeah.
Went through the test and it did horribly. They
Oh
found all
no.
kinds of problems.
Yeah.
My arterial age was significantly older than my age, my actual chronological age. I had all the wrong lipid panel markers, high inflammation, just, across the board, all the things.
Yeah.
And they were really no help. They were like, well, just follow a heart healthy diet and exercise more, but couldn't really tell me details, what that meant, what I
Right.
should stop doing, what I should start doing. And I was looking at my life going, I think I'm already doing all of that. I'm
Yeah.
not overweight. I don't smoke, never have. Like, I couldn't really pinpoint anything, but I was like, okay, so, I just did my best. I cut out saturated fats even more, which I
Oh,
already wasn't really eating. And I
right.
increased fiber intake and whole grains and more vegetables, and ultimately even went fully plant-based,
Wow.
thinking that this will be low calorie, low
Yeah.
fat, super healthy, high fiber, all the things. 1 year later, went back, had the test done again. Had
Mhm.
actually even lost a little bit of weight along the way because I increased my exercise,
Sure.
changed a few things. Went back, did the exact same panel again, and it was all worse,
Oh, no.
worse, doing
That's
even better.
discouraging. Yeah, that's discouraging.
Yeah. And scary because now my arterial age was 11 years older than my chronological age, which would put
Wow.
me at about the age of my mom passing.
Wow.
And so I'm like, okay, well, this is not okay.
Yeah.
And now they actually found visible plaque. They found issues that were
Mhm.
worse after doing all of the things. And it like made no sense. I'm eating, this wasn't Doritos and Oreos kind of plant-based. This was whole vegetables,
Whole
whole
food,
grains.
plant-based diet.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
was good quality fats for what little I was getting. I was
Yeah.
olive oil and those kinds of
Yeah.
things. Super low saturated fat, no animal fat, like all the things they tell us are clogging our arteries. I wasn't eating
Yeah.
any of it. Still didn't smoke, exercise daily, all of the things. And so that's what really made me go, okay, wait, this is not working. All the conventional advice just
Yep.
made me worse and fast tracked me towards my grave. What in the world is going on? I'm following everything they're telling us to do. And so that's when I put my investigator coat on and I'm
Uh-huh.
like, I got to get to the bottom of this because clearly these guys aren't helping me.
Right.
And so that's kind of where my investigative skills then kicked in. And I was able to read the research and
Mhm.
follow different people and get more opinions and really find new evidence for why that wasn't working. And
Right.
so that's how it ultimately pivoted me to really caring about this stuff and, helping other people who are getting the same terrible advice that's only
Yeah.
making them worse.
Yeah. So what did you do to change your health?
So initially, I really had to get to the bottom of why was this happening? I
Yeah.
wasn't doing anything harmful. I wasn't doing all the things that we know do cause harm, like smoking, like
Right.
being sedentary,
Yep.
all of the low-hanging fruit I wasn't doing. And I'm like, okay, so there's got to be more to it. There still has to be an underlying cause. I really didn't want to just blame genetics. Like I
Right.
knew enough about that was actually originally where I was going to go was into genetic research
Okay.
before I pivoted to forensic science. So I
Okay.
knew a fair amount, or at least I thought I did, about genetics. And I'm like, I know that that isn't like a guarantee. We like
Right.
to blame genetics because our family histories have things, but really what runs in families is behaviors and habits and choices and preferences.
Well,
It's
yeah.
really not about the genetics.
Yep.
And so I didn't want to blame that, but I'm like, okay, well, there's got to be something else I'm doing then that doesn't make any sense.
Hmm.
So when I discovered this whole like functional medicine side of the world that I didn't know up until that point even existed and was still kind of in the fringe, it really wasn't a common thing back then because this was 20 years ago now.
Hmm.
Um, I did go through some different testing. So I got a much more comprehensive blood chemistry panel done that looked at inflammation markers and blood sugar handling and, just the whole picture. And
Yeah.
also through my just research and understanding the human body and health and all the things, discovered some stuff I didn't even know was going on. Like I was chronically constipated.
Mm.
I had
Yeah.
no idea. That was the only state I'd ever known. I
Right.
didn't even
Seem
know it.
normal to you, right?
It was totally normal to me. I
Yeah.
didn't even know that was a problem. So I wasn't looking for a solution for that problem
Right.
until I actually figured out how really actually
That it was a
unhealthy that
problem.
was.
Right.
Yeah. And so I ended up through all of this stuff, figuring out why my gut was a mess and that I had underlying issues causing insulin resistance,
Mm.
nutrient deficiencies,
Yeah.
all of this. And so knowing that, then I had to look, okay, what am I doing that's causing these things? And, insulin resistance, when I looked at what I was eating all plants. Yeah, those
Mhm.
are all great, but they're all also
All
carbs,
carbs. Hmm.
all carbs.
All carbs. Yep.
And a lot of whole grains because that's what we were told to eat, a lot
Yep.
of whole grains. And so everywhere I like was eating meat, I swapped it for a grain. Well, that's even higher carb.
Higher carb, higher starch, higher insulin
Yep.
productivity. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was literally trying to do all the right things, but doing all the wrong things. That
Right.
was also a tremendous amount of fiber, which we're all told is great, but I was constipated.
Right.
So it was actually not helping me. It was making things worse.
Yeah.
Through this process, I was also really deficient in protein because I
Hmm.
wasn't eating any animal proteins really. I was eating occasional eggs and once in a while seafood, but for the most part, it was just plants. So
Sure.
I was really low in protein and really low in fat. Well, when you
Mm.
don't have enough fat, you don't make it bile appropriately. You don't release bile. So you can't digest and absorb nutrients very well. So what little I was actually taking in, I couldn't absorb it, couldn't
Right.
process it. Because without the bile, you don't have
You don't have good
digestive enzymes. You
right, because it
can't
triggers
absorb
that
any of
whole
those things.
cascade of triggering of Yeah.
Yep.
You don't
And so
have
I set my
bile,
whole gut
pancreas. Yeah.
system up for overgrowing bacteria. And
Yes.
when I did the functional stool test, sure enough,
Fair
I
enough.
had H. pylori, I had low digestive enzyme outputs, I had all the wrong
Yeah.
bacteria and none of the good guys, like the exact opposite of what you would think from my healthy, whole food, plant-based diet.
Right. Right.
It totally had gone the wrong direction. So this was yet again, all the conventional advice was not serving me. But
Yeah.
now I was armed with why. I knew
Yep.
exactly what I was doing wrong. And couple that with a high stress job, random hours,
Yep.
interrupted sleep. You know, when I look back at it now, I'm like, I was actually eating more even junk than I thought because, you're on a 24-hour crime scene. They're bringing pizza and they're bringing burgers and
Yep.
you're getting whatever you can eat in the moment because it's not like you can run home and cook in the middle of a
Yeah.
major investigation. And so I wasn't purchasing those foods, but I was actually eating more of them than I would have admitted at the time.
Sure.
Still wasn't the staple of my diet. The bulk of my diet was still what I was making, all of those things. But you pair all of these problems together, and of course, you're going to have chronic disease.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I caught it early enough that I was able to reverse it all without medications or, without any serious impacts.
Right.
And when I turned it all around, added animal products back in, changed up my exercise routine, because that was the other thing, is I was also overtraining in an
Oh,
effort to fix all
yeah.
these
I've
problems.
been there, done that too. Yep.
And so that was just contributing to inflammation and all of the things. And so once I kind of turned it all around and started doing ancestrally appropriate things and changed, not only my diet, but my lifestyle as well,
Yeah.
went back again, had the same cardiac panel done, couldn't find any issues. My arteries were now younger than I was. No
Awesome.
plaque found, no issues anywhere. My lipid panel was all perfect.
Yeah. How long
So
did
I
that take?
literally had to do the opposite of what they
Yeah.
to do.
How long did that take?
Um, I went back that third time when everything was great. That was about 4 years later.
Yeah.
I could have probably done it sooner than that, but they didn't bring the panel back to us anymore. We had
Gotcha.
a different command staff and things were different by then. So that wasn't happening. So I actually went to their office and I said, I've done this twice. I want this exact same panel again.
Yeah.
And so I actually went and did the same thing. So it was like 4 years later, but a lot of it had reversed, I think, before that. I just didn't have the labs to prove
Yeah,
it.
lab to prove it. Yeah. So, but even 4 years, right? You had a whole
Yeah.
lifetime of all this building up, and
Yeah.
it took a year for it to get worse than it was before. And then, 4 years later, everything is clear. I mean, that's a huge, and it's a testimony to, you have to stay the course, right? You have
Yep.
to do your investigation. What's not working? Like, we're not
Yep.
destined to live with heart disease. We're not destined to live with diabetes. We're not destined to live with dementia. Like, so many of these things can be reversed, and you were young enough that it was a lot easier for you to reverse those things, and which you still can reverse them at 60,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
It's just, it is harder. You hate to say age is a factor, but it is.
Well, and you've just had it for that much longer. So there's that
Right.
much more damage that has
Yeah.
been done. I don't know that age by itself is really that much of a risk. I mean, obviously you are responding a little bit slower as we age and those kinds
Yeah.
of things. But really the bigger thing I see is that you've had it for 40 years instead of
Instead
10.
of me. Yes, exactly. Yeah, for sure. So I would love to dive into some of this insulin resistance with you, because I don't think people really understand the impact. And so the mainstream media is, feeding us these lies that you need to be plant-based, 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 because heart disease and cholesterol and dementia. So we need to be plant-based. And as we've seen in this industrial revolution, especially since the 60s and 70s, where fat became vilified, don't eat butter, don't eat any animal fat, decrease your beef, all those kind of things. Cancer rates have gone up instead of gone down. Dementia has certainly gone up instead of gone down. Alzheimer's, all those kind of things. So let's talk about what a big impact insulin is on the body from head to toe.
Yeah. Insulin really, a lot of us think of it as only related to diabetes.
Right.
We hear of a type 1 diabetic who has to shoot themselves with insulin multiple times a day. That's kind of what most people think of with insulin. But it's really a life necessary hormone. All of us outside of type 1 diabetes, all of us make our own insulin every day, pretty much all day long. We have some level of insulin going on. One of its most famous roles is in managing blood sugars.
Mm-hmm.
It acts as kind of like the key that opens the door to the cell and allows the glucose out of the blood and into the cell, where it can go to the mitochondria and be converted into cellular energy.
Right.
That's how it works throughout the entire body. Every cell in your body does this. We don't always need insulin to open the door, but the main thing that insulin is doing is not just really opening the door, but it's telling the cells what to do with that incoming energy.
Right. It's a
Namely, are
communication
we
path.
going to burn it? Are we going to store it? What are we doing? And most of the time, insulin is really only present when we're in the fed state. So we've just eaten something. We're still actively digesting and absorbing those nutrients. We've got active energy floating through our cells or through our blood going to the cells to be converted into cellular energy. So that means we have excess. We don't actively need that energy right now. And so insulin is generally telling your cells to convert that for storage. We're in a time of feast. So we've got all this extra. So we're going to pack it on for later when we're in a time of famine. And so throughout your entire body, insulin is telling every single cell what to do. The problem becomes with our highly refined diet, with our high sugar diet, with all of our sodas and sugary coffees and refined grains and breads and just all these things that we're consuming, and the fact that we're eating like 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 times a day nowadays, you're constantly spiking your insulin, which means your insulin is getting higher and higher and higher to keep your blood sugars in check. But eventually your cells are full and they're no longer responding. And so now you have high insulin and high or resistance to that insulin, and it just doesn't work anymore.
It doesn't. So are you saying that we were fed a lie when they were telling us to eat 6 times a day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely contributing to the problem because every time you put anything in your mouth, you get some insulin response.
Yep.
Even thinking about food or seeing or smelling food can cause an insulin release.
Isn't that crazy, right?
It is.
The body is so sensitive.
It is. And so the more often we are shoveling stuff into our bodies, the more often we're getting an insulin spike. And if you get that spike like we're supposed to get, that's a normal thing within reason. We're supposed to get the spike, but it takes time to come back down after that meal. But if you then, it starts coming down and then you eat again, and you eat again, and it starts coming down, you eat again, it never comes back down to baseline.
Right.
And eventually, once you have that resistance to the hormone, your body's going to start cranking out even more. It's going to be screaming louder to your cells because having the sugar in your blood is very toxic. Yes. So it's like, we got to get the sugar out of the blood and into the cells somewhere. And so it just produces more and more and more insulin to do that job.
And so where does the insulin go if it can't go into the cell?
The sugar ultimately will get stored somewhere. It will get converted. It generally will go back to the liver. The liver will package it up as triglycerides. It'll actually convert the sugar to fat. And then those triglycerides will get stored somewhere in your body. That might be your adipose tissue. But if your adipose tissue, your fat cells, are insulin resistant, then they're not letting any in either. And so now that's when you end up with fatty liver or fatty pancreas or visceral fat or, this ectopic fat that just shows up where it shouldn't be. We really only want fat in our fat cells. We don't want it in these other tissues. But at some point, it's got to go somewhere. And so it gets stored in whatever place your body can put it.
Right. So we're seeing an obesity epidemic, right? So 70% of the population is overweight. A certain percentage of those people are obese. And I don't know about you, but thinking back when I was younger, I mean, we had families that were pudgier, right?
Yep.
But they were pudgier like all over, But now we see people that are actually disfigured. And so when you see this ectopic, fat deposits as you're talking about, can you address that a little bit? Because I think it's so interesting because when you're looking around and, you see these men and women alike, but they've got these, it's just like this big bowl of jelly. It's not like that hard grandpa belly anymore, right? It's just things that just hang and it's disfiguring. And I feel for those people who have those challenges because, they've been lied to. They haven't been, given the right information. Like, this is how you reduce your insulin levels. This is how we get rid of your obesity. This is how we fix your thyroid. This is how we get you off of blood pressure medication. It's not eating, 6 to 10 times a day because you're just constantly turning on that insulin response and your body has to deal with it, right? So can you talk about, that ectopic deposits and what's that doing to the body and, kind of where do we go from there once you've had that happen?
Yeah. I think there's a couple different things here. You can have this kind of weird fat deposit or what looks like fat deposit for a
Yeah.
variety of reasons. There are certain conditions like lymphedema or lymphedema.
Right.
There
Yep.
are some medical conditions that sort of look like weird fat deposition. And sometimes it is, sometimes it's just fluid. It
Yeah.
just sort of depends on the condition. So for sure, figure out what your condition is before you necessarily just implement something, because you might actually implement the wrong plan based on the condition you have. If it's not one of those conditions and it truly is just fat deposit, what's generally happening is overall your metabolism is a little bit wonky. And so
Mhm.
you've got things that are happening that shouldn't be happening. You've got excess storage being put in different places because this isn't just an insulin problem. That's one of the main drivers. That's what's telling your body to store stuff. But we also have estrogen that's telling it where to go,
Right.
how to store it, where to store it. Your genetics do play into that as well. That's why as we gain weight, generally we gain it in the same way as our family. You get a big butt or you get big hips
Right.
or you get,
Right.
whatever that looks like. So I think the other distinction, like you said, the hard belly, that's generally visceral fat. So that's the fat that's actually around your organs that's incredibly dangerous. That is literally choking off nutrients
Right.
to your organs. So that is the worst kind of fat. Now, the good news with that kind of fat is that's also the fat your body wants to get rid of the fastest. So
Exactly.
that's actually
Yeah.
the easiest fat to get rid of if you change things.
Yeah.
When it's the jiggly fat and the hanging fat and those kinds of things, it looks worse, but it's actually a little bit healthier because it's not choking off your organs. So again, that comes back to the hormone dysregulation, though. It's
Mhm.
excess consumption in general. It's consumption of foods that are causing higher insulin spikes.
Yeah.
It's eating too often. It's eating at the wrong times of day. It's also stress induced, which is rising cortisol, which is another hormone.
Yep.
Cortisol's entire mission is to raise your blood sugar to give you energy to fight off the stressor, whatever
Right.
that is, the tiger, the whatever is coming at you, so you can run from it or fight it.
Yep.
But most of us are sitting and stewing in our stress these days.
Yeah.
We're swimming in toxins. We're surrounded by infections that we're not fully dealing with. We're dealing with worries and financial stress and relationship stress and traffic and all of the emotional stressors that come with life. We have
Hmm.
all of these stressors coming in, and cortisol is raising your blood sugar that you don't actually need, but you can't stop it when you've
Yep.
got high cortisol, which is also raising your insulin, even when you're not eating anything. You're getting a cortisol spike and you're getting an insulin spike because of the blood sugar. And then those two feed on each other. Cortisol always wins in that battle. So it will
Always.
always keep your blood sugar up. So
Yep.
the more often you're in a stressed out state, eating on the go, always in a rush, always worried, always kind of in your mind about all these things, your cortisol is always going to be a little bit high.
Yeah.
And that's going to disrupt your sleep, which is just going to further the problem. It's going to change your appetite. It's going to change your cravings. It's going to make sticking to your plan that much harder. It's
Yeah.
going to make injuries more likely. It's just all the things, they all just feed on each other. And so it's really the cascade of all of these hormones. And estrogen really is a big one for both men and women. We
Hmm.
are so overly exposed to chemicals that mimic estrogen
Yep.
but that's driving a lot of where this body fat is being stored and how much body fat you have. Because then your body fat actually kind of becomes sort of like an ovary. It ends up
Yeah.
actually producing more insulin or more estrogen. It takes your testosterone and converts it to estrogen. And so a lot of us are ending up as estrogen dominant, where we have
Yep.
way higher estrogen than we think we do, or than we want to have on board. And
Yep.
that's causing, males to develop breast tissue. It's
Yep.
causing women to gain more around the middle.
Yep.
All of these things, it's changing where we're storing the fat, in addition to the insulin causing more fat storage.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Can you speak specifically to the women who are listening? Uh, and how like this is really affecting their perimenopausal journey into menopause, that whole, because I would really love to get a hold of 16-year-olds and say, hey, let's switch things. And so they don't develop all these things. So can you kind of give us a rundown of how that's affecting us through every different stage of our lives, hormonal lives as a female?
Yeah, there's so many things that are affecting us as women and our hormones specifically. So we've got hormone birth control, which is
Right.
synthetic,
Ugh.
hormones. They're
Yeah.
not reacting in the body as your normal natural hormones do. And even if it's not the birth control pill, the IUDs, a lot of them have hormones with them. It's across the board. You're getting
Yeah.
exposure to synthetic chemicals. So that's disrupting your normal cycle to begin with.
Yeah.
We've got all these xenoestrogens or synthetic estrogens or estrogen mimickers that are in our foods, that are in all of the plastics that we're surrounded by nowadays, from, shower curtains to food packaging to personal care products. You've got the chemicals that are actually in our food and in our personal care products and cosmetics. All of these things are really disrupting our overall endocrine function. So every hormone in the body is impacted by these. They seem to be, at least as of the research right now, they really seem to be mimicking mostly estrogen or changing how estrogen works.
Works.
So
Yeah.
they're either providing a chemical version of estrogen, or they're mimicking it in a way that still attaches to the estrogen receptors that are on every cell in your body. And if that's the case, if it's a mimicker that's attaching to the receptor, now you don't actually have estrogen attached. So you're not actually getting the function that you're
Right.
supposed to be getting. And if it's an estrogen, uh, if it's a similar estrogen, a chemical-based estrogen, whether it be a synthetic true estrogen or something that works like estrogen, or it's your real estrogen, if it attaches, either way, you've got higher levels now, and
Right.
you're getting other disrupted endocrine function. All of these hormones actually play together. So if you have higher levels of something, it's changing levels of something else.
Right.
You might end up with higher
Things have
levels
to
of
stay in
that something
balance.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might end up with not enough. Every hormone in the body is a cell signal. So it's telling the brain, we've got a lot of this, or we don't have enough of this, or it's whatever. And that's dictating all the rest of your hormones. And so these toxins in our life are really a big deal. And so that can lead to missed periods, cycle irregularities, really bad PMS, all of the endocrine and organ
Yep.
dysfunctions that can happen just with a normal cycle can lead to infertility, can lead to cysts on your ovaries. It can contribute to insulin resistance, that can contribute to PCOS and, polycystic ovarian syndrome. It can really lead to all of these issues. And then as we transition through life, it can certainly affect whether or not you can get pregnant. It can certainly affect how pregnancies go. It can increase your risk of gestational diabetes and all of these kinds of things. And then as we get into perimenopause, it can make that process no fun.
Nope.
All the PMS symptoms, all the extremely heavy bleeding, the, serious night sweats, the like worst of the worst as you're going through this transition. And then even into menopause, it can still keep affecting you.
Yeah.
We still have hormones after menopause.
I
We still
think
have
we've
estrogen. We
done
still
that
have
as
progesterone.
well, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so it really is a problem that goes throughout life. And I think it's more evident in women because we have the cycles and we have all these things that we kind of have to pay attention to every month all the time. But really the same stuff is happening in the men too. It just shows up a little bit differently because estrogen isn't their primary hormone,
Yeah.
but they also don't want a lot of it. They
Yeah.
want to keep their testosterone higher and they don't want too much estrogen. And so the same issues are happening in men. It's just a little bit less symptomatic. And
Mhm.
it's, the bigger things like the belly fat and the man boobs and those kinds of things that develop.
Right. Right. So it affects everybody. Totally.
And it's also changing how early puberty is happening.
Oh,
It's
that's what I was just going to
endocrine
say.
disruptors
Mhm.
are what's driving,
Yeah.
girls and boys both having changes in when puberty is happening
Yeah.
and, how quickly
And they're
that
not ready
happens.
for
And
that yet. They don't
yeah,
understand what's happening and it does confuse them.
yep.
Sure. For sure. I love it. I love it. I might touch a little a hard nerve on some of the people listening because this is kind of becoming a dirty word, but it's a popular word at the moment. How do you feel about Ozempic?
I think we have a lot to learn still about this. I think from what I've seen, when the original drugs came out, they were much lower dosage when they were strictly for more of the type 2 diabetes treatment realm of things and really weren't being used for weight loss per se.
Yeah.
The newer versions are much higher dose.
Yeah.
And so just by the very nature of any drug, the more you take, the more likely you are to have side effects and problems and all the things. So that alone is a little worrisome. I don't think we've had them on the market long enough yet to really know what the long-term implications are.
Yeah.
Does that mean we should absolutely avoid them? That's a personal choice, of course, as is everything. I
Yeah.
think they do have some benefits. I mean, there really are some good things that do come from them.
Mm-hmm.
you have to kind of weigh, are the risks worth that?
Right.
And I do think the people that are going to be and that have been so far the most successful when using those kinds of drugs also do the diet and lifestyle.
Right.
And that's what allows them to get the results they want using the drug as a tool. And then they get off of the drug and keep going with the diet and lifestyle. And I do think that seems to work for some people. Now, the side effects are pretty scary. The people that are having the
Yeah.
worst of the worst reactions,
Yeah.
those are not things people would sign up for. I mean, these can be life-threatening, they can be permanent damage. These are serious things. And there's those kinds of risks with every medication. So, I mean, let's not make this look like it's the worst drug on the planet, because that's true with every drug. There's
Right.
always
It
going to
just
be
happens
people
to
who
be
react in
super
the worst.
popular at the moment for weight loss, and
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm a bigger fan of like keeping doses as low as possible if
Yep.
you are going to do any kind of medication. Take as little of it as possible.
Yep.
And I know that kind of ends up in the off-label use category because, they give you what dosing it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So that would just be a real deep conversation to have with your practitioner and just say, look, I want as little as possible to get me to my goal, to help me get there. And you just have to kind of see if they're willing to play that game with you. I
Yeah.
do think there are some other ways that you can mimic on a more natural scale without using the medications. There are certain foods and activities that we can do that can kind of mimic that same thing. Any food actually is going to naturally release some of your own
Yeah.
endogenous, your body's making GLP-1.
Mm-hmm.
It's a natural hormone that we make. That's what this drug is mimicking, is it's giving
Right.
you a bigger dose of this GLP-1 hormone. But there's certain things you can do. There are certain foods that seem to increase it even more.
Okay, like what?
Newer sugar on the market called allulose is
Yep.
one of them. It's a natural sugar, but it actually lowers blood sugars and
Hmm.
it increases insulin sensitivity because it raises GLP-1 naturally.
Gotcha.
So I think there's stuff like that. There's also yerba mate tea is
Mm-hmm.
another one that can do that. Really any protein, certain kinds of fat,
Yeah.
even being in a ketogenic state can also raise your GLP-1, keep you more satiated, all of these kinds of things.
Right.
So I think there's ways that we can do it more naturally without leaning on drugs. But I
Yeah.
do know some people who have been really benefited by temporary use of some of these drugs.
Yeah.
So I think it's a big question. I think we have a lot to learn still. I think there's probably going to be additional information coming from safety profiles and success stories and how people are getting off of them. And I think there's
Yeah.
still a lot to be learned. I think it's a big question that there's no easy answer to.
I know.
I
Yeah.
personally probably would not take them, but I totally get why people do,
Oh,
or
absolutely.
why they're interested anyway.
Yeah. And if they don't know another way, they're going into their doctor and the doctor's like, hey, it does sound really good, right? It does
Mhm.
sound like something that will get them out of the crisis that they're in. And I don't know if you see this too, but I get the people that they're still in a crisis after they take it,
Yeah.
that or another medication. I get the people that it doesn't work for. So I know there's some people out there that it has,
Yep.
other medications as well, which is great. And that's why they're there and available and those things. But I see so many people, in my
Yeah.
practice, it just
I
hasn't.
look at it sort of the same way as I would if someone was interested in gastric bypass. That's a major life
Mhm.
decision. Some of the surgeries are reversible, so it's not necessarily permanent. Some of them are.
Yeah.
And obviously there's always that risk of you
Yeah.
can't reverse it or it doesn't come back or whatever. So I kind of look at it in that same way of like, have you done everything possible
Yeah.
before you jump into the deep end? And I also think the other problem is, most doctors don't have any training in nutrition and lifestyle, and they
No,
don't
they
have the
don't.
time to really adequately counsel patients on these things. And so a lot of times you only get, well, here's this medication.
Yeah.
And then if you're not pairing it with all the other good diet and lifestyle things, then now you're not only at risk for the serious side effects
Yeah.
that you may not even have known were possible, but you're also at greater risk for muscle loss, for, a lot of the just physical changes as well that are increasing the risk of lots of other diseases like osteoporosis and sarcopenia and a lot of these other things. And I don't think people are being adequately informed
Yeah.
of both things they can do in addition to, things they can do in place of, and the risks associated. I think you really need to do some good research before you take any medication, before you take any procedure. We should all be doing our due diligence and really finding out the pros and cons and
Yeah.
options. That
Yeah.
might not be your only option.
I know, because there are so many options out there. So what would you tell somebody who's like, okay, Andrea, where do I start? Like, what are my next 3 steps?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend a little bit on what your condition is. Have you been a type 2 diabetic for 20 years, or are you just like wanting to lose the last 10 pounds, or maybe you've only gained 10? I think that that's going to vary. And do you have a diagnosed condition or just something you're not happy with?
Yeah.
Where are you on the spectrum? It's going to vary a little bit by how serious your current condition is. But I think for everyone, just start somewhere. Really take a good hard look at all the things you're currently doing. Look at every single label in your pantry and refrigerator. Look at every product you're using on your body, that you take in your body, just all the things. Just start to become more aware of the things that you're exposed to every single
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
And then just make some changes to that. If you start seeing stuff that you're like, well, I don't like that chemical. I didn't even know that was in there. I don't want that food. I didn't know I was eating that much sugar. Like whatever that is, whatever the enlightenment is, then you can start making changes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think start somewhere, just really increase your level of awareness and understanding of the choices that you are making. And then you can take action from there.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. So where do people find you, and how can you help them?
Yeah, so my website's probably the best place, which is healthylifewithandrea.com. From there, you can get, freebies, and my email list is there as well. I send out valuable information on my email list. My podcast is there as well. All the things. You can also schedule a call with me if you want to talk more about what we do. My practice is entirely virtual, so I meet with people on phone calls and Zoom, exclusively one-on-one, and it's kind of concierge style. So really, you just get unlimited access to me. If you have quick questions, you can text or email me. If you need to schedule a call and we need to talk through something or evaluate something or talk about labs or whatever, then we do that on phone calls or Zoom calls. So just sort of depends, but it's unlimited access to me for as long as you're an active client.
I love it. I do the same thing. So it's perfect. Well, I thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a great conversation, one that needs to be had more often. I appreciate your knowledge, your investigative skills, and all the wisdom that you imparted today. So thank you very much, Andrea.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun, and I hope everyone got a lot out of it.
I am sure they did. And thank you everyone for listening. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to this podcast, and I will see you in the next episode.